Hello and welcome to the Growth Hub Export Grant Funding webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to talk today specifically about the export grant within the Growth Hub. We do have other funding available, so please do check out the website to see if there are any other funding available that we might be interested in. So to kick off with the webinar, just to put it into context, so the export grant is part of the wider Growth Hub grant funding that we have available, and we have been commissioned under the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is called locally the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Good Growth Programme or Good Growth Fund. So just to avoid any confusion, if you hear people talk about Good Growth Fund or Programme, that is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund delivered within Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. It is branded as Good Growth. We are the Growth Hub and we are a commissioned project within the Growth Hub, the Good Growth Programme rather. So locally, we've received 132 million through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. That has been topped up by an additional 5 million through the Rural Prosperity Fund. So locally, we have 137 million to spend within Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. The Good Growth Programme has three strands. The first is community in place. The second is people and skills. And then the third is supporting local business. And the Growth Hub is commissioned under the supporting local business strand. If you'd like to find out about any more opportunities through the wider Good Growth Programme, you can visit their website on ciosgoodgrowth.com. Just to let you know that anyone that's receiving investment through the Good Growth Programme not only is looking to improve productivity, but also to deliver improvements in environmental sustainability and social responsibility as well. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that as we go through the webinar. So firstly, who are these grants for? This webinar is specifically about the Growth Hub Export Grant. So there are different rules and criteria for other funding under the Good Growth Programme. So please be aware that this is for Growth Hub funding only. And we are looking for trading businesses. So that could be registered with HMRC. You could be registered with Companies House as a limited company. And for the purposes of this scheme, we also recognise sole traders who are registered with HMRC as also eligible for a grant. We can also work with social enterprises and community interest companies, and any other legally constituted organisation can apply. So that also includes registered charities as well. And if you're looking to invest in your organisation and you're looking for help to do that, then we can talk to you about funding to help your business or organisation to grow. But you must also be able to show how your project that you were looking to invest in will create a positive economic impact for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And to do that, we're actually focusing much more on outcomes and outputs. So therefore, what will be the impact of your project or your investment rather than the activity itself. So that's something to think about as we talk a little bit more detail about the export grants. So we currently have an export grant available. The minimum grant for that is £2,500, and the anticipated grant average is £5,000. So that just gives you an idea that this is particularly focused at smaller projects. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't apply for more, but just please be aware that really the projects that we're expecting to come through under the export grants are going to be on the smaller side of the investment. I talked just now about the focus on outputs and outcomes rather than necessarily the activity. So the outcomes that we are expecting applicants to deliver as part of their investment is things like to create jobs. You might actually be able to safeguard existing jobs within your business. You might be looking to improve productivity. And of course, this is an export grant, so there is a focus there on increased export capability and trading in new markets as well. So in terms of what we can fund, we can look at funding exhibiting at overseas trade fairs or exhibitions. We can look at attendance as a delegate at an international trade show. We can also, if you are going along to a trade show or an exhibition, we can help fund travel and accommodation, entrance and exhibition fees. And also we can help with funding transportation for demonstration equipment. So if you're having to transport your exhibition equipment overseas, then that obviously is eligible spend. We can also look at translation of websites, export or other key documentation. So that might be things like manuals or information around a piece of kit, for instance. And obviously, if you're going to enter a new market, you're going to need some translation support for that. So that is also eligible spend. And also then consultancy. So bringing in third-party expertise to help you with your export activity. So that could be things like a market research, or it could be a strategy if you're planning to enter a new market, you might want to create a strategy and do some market research before you do that. So that is all absolutely eligible spend in terms of the grant funding for export. Just as important to talk about what we cannot fund as what we can. So under the export grant, we are unable to fund wages or salaries. So you cannot claim for the wage of an existing employee with the export grants. We can't replace new for old equipment. So if you are attending a specific trade show that is a regular occurrence, then that would be considered business as usual. So therefore, if you go to a trade show every year, the expectation is that you would continue to fund that through your business as usual activity or your running costs. However, obviously this is about entering new markets. So if you're attending a trade show you haven't attended before, or you haven't attended for a while, then that might be eligible. If you were looking to replace kit for exactly like for like, then that also would be something that we might have to consider, because obviously it's replacing new for old. But if you were planning to deliver or create a brand new exhibition that actually was completely different, then that might be something that we consider. So I mentioned that we can help fund attendance at overseas trade fairs, things like travel and accommodation, but we're not able to fund subsistence costs. So that would be sort of travel or food or drink and that kind of thing. And also other costs that are not directly related to attending the exhibition. So if you were planning an excursion or a trip, as well as the trade fair, then that's something that we would be questioning in terms of spend. So these grants are revenue only, not capital purchases. However, small equipment items below 5,000 may be eligible. So again, talking about creating exhibition equipment. And then finally, costs relating to social media activity in isolation. So if you are planning social media in terms of part of a wider strategy, that might include things like attending a trade fair as well and creating a marketing strategy, then and an export strategy, then that might be something that we could consider. But just funding social media campaign in isolation is not eligible for this export grant. Something else to bear in mind is you cannot have started or committed money to a trade to activity. So an example of that would be if you had put a deposit down to attend a trade fair, a trade show, or an exhibition, then the expectation is that you wouldn't have placed that deposit if you couldn't fund the activity, and that goes towards our need for grants. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you need this grant to deliver this activity, and if you've also already made a financial commitment, then actually that would demonstrate that you were able to fund it yourself. And the same go for contractual commitments. So if you had identified a third party, a consultant to come in and help you, and you had signed a contract to do that, we would then not be able to fund that because, again, you wouldn't have committed to that contract if you weren't able to fund it yourself. So these are all things to consider before thinking about applying. Other key requirements are really important to note. So we have a requirement for 50% match funding, and that's the minimum of 50%. So you can only apply for a maximum of 50% of your total project costs. So, for example, that average total grant is £5,000. So you would apply for the minimum grant of £2,500. That's the maximum that you could apply for within that £5,000 project, and then you would need to provide the other £2,500. And if we consider that the average grant that we're expecting is £5,000, so that would mean that the total project cost would be £10,000. So really important to know where your 50% match funding is coming from. And also the grants are paid retrospectively. And so what we mean by that is that the business or the organisation will need to be able to cash flow the total project, the total cost of the project, and then the grant is claimed back after completion. So going back to that £5,000, if you had a successful grant offer letter, you would be expected to deliver the total project cost of £5,000. Then you would submit a claim with your evidence to claim that £2,500 £2,500 grant back. If that is going to be a challenge, 50% match your cash flow, you can get in contact with us. And we do have a business support project called Access to Finance Plus, and they will be able to look into other opportunities and other possibilities for funding this, not only to potentially find 50% match in cash flow, but also are there any better investment opportunities for you? So don't worry, we recognise that not all businesses are able to provide the 50% match or to cash flow. So if that is the case, please do contact us. Don't just go ahead and fill in your application form. It's probably better that you contact us first. And then finally, just to reiterate that minimum grant value is £2,500. So the minimum project value is £5,000. If you are looking to fund a project that is less than £5,000, this export grant is probably not for you. But again, we can look at other opportunities that are available to you. Other key requirements is that your organisation doesn't necessarily have to be registered or fully located within Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, but any supported activity must take place within Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So obviously, if you're attending an international trade fair, that might be overseas, but the impact that you would feel from doing that activity would need to be based in Cornwall. So for instance, if you were creating a job out of that, then that job would need to be based in Cornwall. There are no deadlines for applications in terms of the export grants, but bear in mind that projects must be completed and the grant must be claimed by the end of March 2025. So really what we're saying is that we're looking for you to have delivered your activity and completed that project by the end of 2024, so December 24, and then that allows that 3-month timescale to claim your grant back. So really we're looking for that activity to happen between now, which is November 2023, and also by the end of 2024. And then you need to work back from that. So if you're attending a trade show, for instance, in August of next year, in 2024, and you're expected to make that commitment by March, then actually you need to work back to understand when you need an offer letter to then be able to commit to that activity. So we don't have a deadline, but your timescale of delivering your project may well do. Another key aspect of anyone that receives investment under the Good Growth Programme, and that it includes Growth Hub, is that we are asking all successful applicants to be paying at least the living wage or commit to paying the living wage by the end of December 2024. So that is currently £12 outside of London. So that is, again, a key requirement that you need to consider before starting an application is, are you willing to make that commitment? Are you already paying the minimum, the real living wage, not the minimum wage, the real living wage to your employees, or are you willing to commit to that? And also bear in mind, again, if you're planning to create a job or more than one job, then when that job comes to fruition, when you employ somebody to do that job, that also needs to be paying the real living wage. So I talked at the beginning of the webinar about environmental sustainability and social responsibility. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. So as well as by delivering your investment, your project, you will be committing to delivering outputs and outcomes. So that's the impact for your business and the economic community in Cornwall. But also we're using this public funding to leverage impacts in environmental sustainability and social responsibility as well. And we're doing that by asking applicants to commit to the good one or a number of the Good Growth Principles. So we'll talk about that now in a bit more detail. So they're split into two sections, or we have for ease, and they are environmental and economic. So these are the Good Growth Principles that you will need to consider. You can sign up to one or more of these, but obviously your grant application is assessed on a scoring system. So the more commitment you make to the Good Growth Principles, the higher your application will score. So we've got a variety of things here. We've got things like reducing CO2 emissions, circularity, so the idea of reuse and recycle principles, nature recovery, and attracting green finance and things like that. So these are listed on our website, and also with some good resources to help you understand what they mean, but also understand how you might be able to contribute to those. And then the other side of the coin is the social responsibility. So you've got some social responsibility Good Growth Principles here that you might be able to commit to. So they're including things like reducing barriers to employment, people with long-term health or disabilities, bringing those, making employment more accessible to those, equal opportunities and things like that. Bear in mind, you don't have to do one on each of these slides, so you don't have to commit to social responsibility and environmental sustainability, but bearing in mind, obviously, the more commitment you make to delivering some of these principles, the higher your application will score. Just going to give you a little bit of an idea here about some of the funded projects that to give you an idea of how what the kind of activity, I should say, that we might be able to look to fund. These are hypothetical, but they are based on real examples. So hopefully we'll give you some idea of what we're talking about. So the first, this was a business who was looking to do a showroom in Paris and pop-up retail space in Japan. So again, accessing 2 new markets. The total project value here was just under 20,000, and so therefore the grant awarded was 9,000. The next example is just a fairly straightforward one, smaller project here, exhibiting at a trade show. So the total cost of that was 8,000. That may well have included exhibition fee costs, transportation of equipment, travel and accommodation for those attending. So the total award there was just over 4,000. Then here's an example of that translation activity that I talked about earlier. So this is a manufacturer, and they were planning to enter the European market, and so therefore their machinery manuals in terms of how to operate their machinery needed to be translated into different languages. And again, the smaller project cost here, just over 6,500. Total grant awarded was 3,280. So that again is a good example of that's more towards the minimum grant value of 2,500. So just some things that you need to be aware of before you start your application is, again, just to reiterate, your business needs to be a legally trading entity. So limited company, sole trader for the purposes of this grant. Sole traders are, we consider them a legal entity. That could be a partnership, you could be a CIC, a community interest company, or you could be a registered charity. Do you have a dedicated bank account? So that's a dedicated bank account for your business. It doesn't have to be a business bank account in terms of a formal with the bank, but you do have to have a separate dedicated bank account for your business. You will also need your latest set of business accounts. You will need to be able to provide those on application. If you are a young business and therefore you don't have a full set of accounts, that doesn't exclude you from this grant, but we will need to look at other options, things like business plans and potentially cash flows. Again, you need to make sure that your business is located, or the activity, the benefit of the project is located in Cornwall of Scilly. Does your project fall within that eligible grant activity that I described? All of that is listed on the website, so you can go and have a look at that just to reiterate. And obviously you can listen back to the grant webinar again, but you do need to make sure that you fall within that eligible activity described. You also need to make sure that your activity can be delivered, your project can be completed by the 31st of December 2024. So that would allow you then 3 months to submit your claim. So therefore you need to consider when that trade show is, how long will it take that strategy to complete. So that 31st of December is a key date for you. You also need to remember that your organisation will need to be either currently paying at least the real living wage or commit to preparing that, or be prepared to commit to that, sorry. And that is by the 31st of December 2024. Then also it's about grant value. So you need your your minimum grant will need to be 2,500 and less than 20,000. So therefore, for instance, if your total project cost is £10,000, then that's a £5,000 grant request. Doesn't mean that you can't apply for more than £20,000 for the export grant, but you will need to contact us rather than necessarily completing an application form online, because we would need to discuss what your activity was. So if you are applying for more than 20,000, we do recommend that you contact us directly to discuss that before starting an application. And then remember that cash flow. So successful grants are paid in arrears. So you will need to be able to deliver your project using that example above of £10,000. So you will need to be able to fund that £10,000 to be able to claim that £5,000 grant back. And again, just remember, we are able to signpost you to that Access to Finance Plus business support should you need to, if you need to look into the options for you to be able to cash flow or look at match funding opportunities. And then here we've been running these webinars on the wider grant schemes for several weeks now, or a couple of months, and so therefore some key frequently asked questions have come up. So we thought that would be useful to go through those now. So as I just said, it's what does starting your project mean? So just to reiterate, you cannot have made any financial contribution to your project, so therefore put deposits down or anything like that. and also you cannot have contracted with a provider. So therefore, if you were looking at bringing in a third party and you started to sign a contract, it's unlikely that we would fund that, because again, you wouldn't have signed the contract if you weren't able to fund that yourself. A new business just started operating. Do I qualify for a grant? Yes, you do. But rather than providing accounts, we will probably look at your business plan and potentially cash flows as well. So just be aware that if you are unable to supply accounts, there may be other requirements to apply for the grant. Can you apply for more than one grant for different projects? The answer is yes. So if you are already considering applying for instance, one of the research, development and innovation grants, or maybe one of the business growth grants, and you'd like to apply for an export grant as well, that's absolutely fine, but you cannot share an outcome. So for instance, if you were applying for a research, development and innovation grant and you were going to create a job from that, you would not be able to then claim that job as well as an outcome for the export grant. You would need to be able to create a separate job or look at the other outputs under the export grants to actually make a commitment to. What can be used as match funding? So any private sector investment. So you might have some reserves that you could call on. You might be able to cash flow the match funding yourself. That might be a commercial business loan. It might be a director's loan into the company, or it could be an equity investment. You can use public sector funding, but you must check with the funding provider to make sure that that is allowed under their terms and conditions. And please be aware that if you are receiving a grant, a different grant, a separate grant from Cornwall Council, you cannot use that as a match funding source. So we cannot use Cornwall Council grant funding to match the export grant. And then just some others. People are also very interested in terms of procurement. So, how do I bring supplies on board? What do I need for a quote? So purchases for under £25,000 excluding VAT with a single supplier, you can direct award. So against a provided quote, you'll need to ask them what you want. They provide them with a brief. They then provide a quote. And if it's under 25,000 excluding VAT with a single supplier, then you can actually direct award. If it's over £25,000 with a single supplier, you will need to go through a procurement process, but please don't worry, we have dedicated support for that and we will hold your hand through that process. It's unlikely through this grant, specifically through the export grant, that you will go over that £25,000 with a single supplier. So that's not total project cost, that's with a single supplier. So therefore that's unlikely to kick in for the export grant. So therefore the likelihood is that you're going to be able to direct award for that. In terms of using local suppliers, we are a Cornwall Council project and we're using Cornwall Council social value policy. So therefore we do ask you to consider local suppliers first. So that could be your third party consultancy or expert that you're bringing in. It could be someone who's producing your exhibition equipment, for instance. So we would ask you to look at local suppliers first, so we can actually maximise this public funding for the benefit of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. But ultimately, we do expect you to go with the best value for money. So therefore, if the local supplier is more expensive or doesn't quite supply what you're looking for, then you're absolutely able to go to UK or actually international suppliers as well. And then in terms of multiple or staged payments, so that's addressing that challenge of cash flow. We can discuss with you about a staged payments for claiming back your grant, but please be aware that the minimum claim value is £2,500. So if you're applying for £2,500 grant, that would make your project £5,000 or more. Then actually we would expect you to just put the one claim in for £2,500. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope you found that really useful. Please be aware that there's lots of information on the website. There's also a direct link to the application form. So once you've watched this webinar and you've read all the information, go and have a look at the Good Growth Principles. They're also available on our website. And at that point, you can start your application. Please do remember to save your application as you go. So you will need to scroll to the bottom and click save on your application. If you do not do that, you risk losing your information. So you might want to consider, for instance, completing the grant offline. So typing it into a Word document or something and then copying and pasting, just so you know you have that information elsewhere. So that was just a top tip. Please do remember to save your information. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your application.